Welcome everyone. We're just going to give this a couple of minutes just to let people join and then we'll kick off. I think we'll give it one more minute, Juliana, and then we'll start.
Sounds good.
Okay, perfect. I think, Juliana, you're all good to go?
Yeah, I'm ready
Amazing.
when you are.
Perfect. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you very much for joining us at 5 o'clock on this Wednesday. This is our Super Women in Tech webinar. My name is Louis. I'm the Associate Director at SGI, and I'm absolutely delighted to be your host for this evening. For those that don't know us, SGI is a global partner in recruitment and consulting. Our mission is to deliver world-class tech talent solutions that empower business and individuals to discover their potential. We're committed not only to delivering innovative solutions, but also to sort of fostering community, inclusion, and opportunities for women and underrepresented groups within the technology space. A bit about today's event. So today's event is part of our Super Women in Tech meetup group. We built this community to connect, amplify, and empower women working in or aspiring to work in technology. Throughout the year, we host webinars, live meetups, and basically opportunities to spotlight voices across industries to bring tech communities together. Just a small piece of housekeeping just before we get started. So today's session will run for about an hour. We are recording the webinar, and we'll share the link afterwards with everyone here that's free that is attending. Feel free to use the chat to engage with other attendees today. The chat is being monitored by our team, so any inappropriate or disruptive messages will be removed. Use the Q&A button to send any questions that you may have during the presentation. Juliana and ourselves, we've sort of allocated some time at the end of the presentation to answer any questions sent in. If you run into any technical issues, send us a message in the chat and our team in the background will do their best to assist and get things running. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Julianna Walsh, founder of LeadHerself, a self-leadership platform helping women and non-binary professionals build the clarity, confidence, and courage to own their careers and step up to lead. Her work brings together psychological science, women's leadership research, and practical self-development to help people navigate career challenges with purpose and integrity. Please join me in welcoming Juliana, and I will hand over to you now.
Amazing. Thank you so much. All right, let me share my screen here and then I'll go ahead and get started. All right, just checking that everybody
We've got that.
You got it. Perfect. Okay, amazing. Thank you so much. And thank you for the introduction, Louis. And thank you to SGI for having me here today. I'll be sharing what I've learned to be the most effective approach for building influence and visibility, particularly when the environment, the culture, or the systems around us don't necessarily make it easy. So I'll be pulling from my own research as an organizational psychologist on how your identity and how your environment can impact your effectiveness in the workplace, along with wider evidence base in this area. But I'll be pairing it with my own experience and my own learnings, because this topic is not just about expertise, it's a personal journey for me. I started out in academia. I got my PhD in org psych, researching gender and leadership, and then went to leadership consulting and kind of had a squiggly career, and ended up working in tech and building my own leadership experience. So influence and visibility personally was quite a big part of my journey in learning these skills. So let's get into it. Let's check here. Okay, so we've all joined this webinar today for a reason, so I don't think anybody here is going to argue that A, influence is one of the most important skills out there, and B, it can be tough. There can be tension around building this skill and using it in your work environment. A lot of leadership models, role models out there, and general theories about leadership tend to value dominance classically, rather than the nuance that is often required in effective leadership and is more realistic for how people show up in the workplace. So visibility can feel like vulnerability. It can feel like exposure for a lot of us in the workplace. And it's tough. You might be told to speak up, be more confident, be assertive, but perhaps you're not always heard fairly, or maybe it doesn't really go the way you expect it to. And at the same time, a lot of support out there, a lot of the guidance and advice that we receive might ignore the context and the reality that you bring with your entire identity and your gendered reality. So sometimes advice in this area can feel one size fits all, and it doesn't really work the same for everybody trying to apply it. And you can also feel this tension internally, because behaviors associated with influence can sometimes conflict with what you are maybe praised for growing up. If you were socialized or conditioned to not take up space, to not make a mess, to not be too loud, when you're taught to be quiet and neat, you might end up with perfectionist or people-pleasing habits. Which probably serve you really well for a while, but then start counting against you at a certain point in your career and in a working world that tends to value different behaviors. So that might not apply for everybody, but take what resonates for you during this talk. And the impact of these models of this environment around us tends to be subtle. It's not always overt. So we can sometimes internalize it, and we can end up feeling like either we're not enough in some way or another, or we might be too much, because we get these little signals, we get this little feedback around us that we pick up on, and sometimes that can be turned inwards. I started out my career struggling with confidence, and not just confidence, but how confidence manifests in the workplace. So speaking up, taking up space, taking risks, being assertive, being decisive, stuff like that. And I had feedback from well-intentioned mentors and managers telling me to be more confident. And so I did a lot of work in this area to overcome it and practice those skills and start showing up in a way that was more what I thought effective for my career, and how you should be, and be more effective, be stronger. And then I got the feedback that I was too difficult, that I had become difficult to manage. And I don't know if anybody out there has had similar experiences, but it's tough. It can really hurt. So how do we build these skills in an environment that doesn't always see us clearly? That's what we'll be getting into today. And I want to cover first how others see us, because understanding this is key to knowing how to build influence strategically. So you might have heard some of these terms thrown around, like cognitive shortcuts, the heuristics our brain uses to save energy, save on processing time. So we have stereotypes and prototypes and assumptions and judgments that our brain makes quite quickly, often without us being aware of it. So when it comes to leadership, we call these implicit leadership theories. These are unconscious prototypes of what an effective leader looks like. And these traditionally, but still very prevalent today in many countries around the world, tend to overemphasize masculine characteristics. So our identity and how we show up in the world tends to trigger expectations in the people we're interacting with, certain traits or behaviors that will match that identity that we're showing up with. And brains react negatively when there's any mismatch between what somebody's expecting and that reality. So if somebody's expecting you to show up in a certain way and then you behave in a way that's different from that, we end up with things like the double bind, which you might have heard about, where women are either seen as leadership material and you're being strong, or you're seen as soft and then you're more like a woman. So you've got this kind of superficial binary divide in terms of how you're showing up in the workplace. And research has shown that women need to be seen not just as competent, but also as warm in order to have the same level of influence that their male counterparts would have by just showing up with the competence piece of that. So that's not always fun to talk about, but it is oversimplified. Perceptions are compounded and complicated by a lot of different factors. It's not this straightforward, and it's not always to our disadvantage, which is why it's so important to understand how these expectations work and how you might be able to use them to your advantage. So let's get into what we can do about it, what's in our control, and what will help us get where we want to go in a sustainable way without burning out. So how do we navigate the double bind? And I don't want to get too hung up on this term, the double bind. Think of this more generally as how do you navigate seemingly conflicting expectations in your environment, which we all face on a daily basis. There's three things that are super important here. So the first one is the context. So being aware of not just cultural values around you, the values for equality and inclusivity in your environment, but just being aware of how things work around you. Being aware not just of how this goes in your team and your company, but in the broader context you're in, the country you're in. So it's being aware of the reality you're showing up within, because that can change, that can alter the pros and cons associated with showing up in a certain way in the workplace. So it's helpful to know that context. The second piece is identity. And I know we're talking about women in tech and women in male-dominated spaces today, but we are so much more than our gender. So intersectionality, the cross-section of different pieces of your identity and how you're showing up, that multifaceted approach to identity. So thinking about expectations that might be triggered by all sorts of different pieces of who you are and how you show up. And that can be quite complex, so I'm not going to go too far into it. The last piece here is what is most important, and this is what's in your control and what you can do about showing up in this environment once you understand the context and how people might expect you to act. It's the mindset. So the paradox mindset is, it means not just accepting this tension that exists. So you're seeing these seemingly conflicting expectations that you're dealing with, right? And you accept that it's there. And instead of going from, I'm either strong or I'm soft, you switch to an and it's an either or, and then switching to a both and approach to that. So instead of picking one or the other, you're embracing both of them, and it encourages flexibility between very authentic personality traits and qualities and ways that you show up in the world, because we are so much more than the tick boxes on, the stereotype of what a woman is or that prototype. We have very complex personalities that tend to shift by the situation that we're in, and can be malleable. So it's having a little bit more of a creative mindset about these situations that we might be in, and trying to embrace different pieces of your personality, pairing your warmth with strength, your collaborative approach with being decisive. So this approach has the most empirical evidence behind it for how women can navigate subtle systemic barriers. And it's definitely possible, and it's much easier if you have clarity around these things. And as more of us are moving into leadership and stepping into our potential, we're able to keep nudging that prototype of what a leader looks like and how she shows up. So I wanted to cover that before we get started, because it's key to understanding how to move forward. I do want to define what we're talking about here so we know how to build these skills, because we each have our own perceptions of what influence, visibility, these other terms, what these mean. And it's often from how we perceive them in others, like how we judge them in others. So influence, it doesn't necessarily mean being loud or being dominant. It's about shaping decisions, narratives, and outcomes. Visibility doesn't mean oversharing or putting on a show or performing a persona. It's being known for specific value and expertise. Presence, presence doesn't mean having extroversion or confidence as your entire personality. It's actually internal. It's the alignment, clarity, and intention that you hold with yourself that builds your presence. Power doesn't mean having a senior job title or, striking fear in everyone around you. Your power is reflected more on the impact you have on others and your community and the world around you. So I wanted to level set there before we get started on the foundation of building your influence. And that is with purpose and authenticity. I feel like these terms are thrown around a lot, but they cannot be undervalued, because without this, you have a shaky foundation for building your influence. Influence is really only successful when it's serving something that you care about. So you benefit from that clarity in your direction and what you're trying to achieve. And then it's more likely, the success of your influence is more likely when it's done from a place of authenticity, from genuine presence, with your own authentic credibility and consistency. It's a lot easier to do when you've got a clear purpose and you're clear on your authenticity. So on being clear about the purpose, it gives you motivation, not just to tackle these situations, but to get out of your comfort zone and to grow. So thinking about your why when you're in any situation, whether you're trying to practice something you're a little uncomfortable with, or you're just trying to demonstrate your influence. Malala talks about advocating for girls' education when she was still a teenager, often in rooms with very senior, powerful world leaders. And she describes how nervous she would get, but she had this technique where she would start focusing on the girls she was trying to help, what she was in the room to achieve. And that shifted the focus from her onto what she's there to say. So grounding yourself in your why, grounding yourself in a purpose is very powerful for these activities. And then authenticity. So this is a tricky one, because there's a lot of advice out there that tells you to just be 100% your beautiful, authentic self. But authenticity, as described by Brené Brown, is not just showing up as your real self, but doing so with boundaries. So only be yourself with people who have earned the right to see you. And I can imagine that not everybody you work with has earned that right yet. So think about what boundaries you want to have around your authenticity. So be intentional about what authentic leadership looks like for you, which genuine traits and habits really serve your power, and where do you need to stretch to make sure that you are showing up in a way that supports your influence and supports your goals. There's always a degree of impression management, but let it be intentional and aligned with how you want to show up. So these are two things important to reflect on and really think through as you're getting started here. And this is a thought exercise that you can do on your own time, especially if visualization is something that works for you. I do want to note at this point that I did create a toolkit that complements this talk. So all of the exercises in here and all of the actions that I recommend and all of the resources, any books or anything like that that's referenced or mentioned, those are included in that toolkit. So this is something you can do in your own time, thinking about what it would look like to have influence in your current role. And this isn't meant to be some sort of personality overhaul. Don't go so far out of who you really are and how you're showing up today and completely reinventing yourself. But it still has to feel authentic. You're not faking it until you make it. You're channeling a very real part of yourself, real traits, qualities, and skills, and you're leaning into that. You're fostering those and seeing how that can impact your influence. Thinking about this, thinking about what you would look like, how you would show up with more influence is especially important when there may not be a lot of role models that look like us and lead how we want to lead in our immediate environment. We don't have somebody to emulate. So that's when it's really important to turn inwards. I can't underestimate how important it is to trust yourself and your instincts and turning inwards to check your own alignment on these things with how you want to show influence in the workplace. So that's an exercise that you can check out and think about if it resonates for you. So getting into the core of this, really, how do you build influence then? And you might recognize this general approach, this 3 steps here from what I was talking about earlier with the double bind, starting with that external audit. And we're specifically thinking about if you want to build influence and visibility in your career with your goals, with your authentic leadership, what is the environment that you're doing this inside of? So you're identifying contextual factors, you're identifying the people or the stakeholders that might be impacting that journey of your influence, and you're thinking about both the challenges and the opportunities there. You're then switching to an internal audit and start with assessing your mindset, how you think, how you feel about your own influence and visibility in the workplace, to see if you have any kind of like mental blocks in that area. So you're starting with a place of openness and readiness towards this. And I'll come back to that at the very end. The internal audit is also thinking about where your current level of influence is, your current level of power, what your reputation is like in your workplace. What do people come to you for advice on? What are you known for? And you're focusing, again, both the positives and negatives, the strengths and the gaps that you might have here. The last piece, once you're understanding the environment and you're understanding internally how this works for you, only then are you deciding on how you want to be building your influence, the steps that you're going to take to practice this, because it's very important. It's aligned so you're not wasting energy, and it's true to where you want to go. That makes it more effective. That makes it strategic rather than just trying to perform influence and visibility. And I do need to note that it's an ongoing thing. Influence is tough to build, and you're building it throughout your career, but it's happening in the background for the most part with your reputation, your consistency, your credibility, how you're showing up. But you're building these habits. And when you're practicing it, try to take it as experimenting with different techniques, different actions, and reflecting and learning and reapplying things, because this will evolve as your goals and the seasons of your career change, and also the environment you're in. So this is going to be a work in progress for a while and not necessarily a destination. Okay. That was all probably pretty high level. So I want to go through examples of how you can actually think about some of these things. So about the external audit, and this isn't comprehensive, this isn't covering everything that's in your environment that you might want to be keeping in mind, but specifically thinking about the people that are in essentially your bubble of influence that you'll be trying to build over the course of your career with where you want to go. So it's called the Power Map, and this is adapted from Melody Wilding, who created it. Or I saw this specifically made for influence when you're managing a project. So starting out with identifying those stakeholders, any of these people who might be in this orbit for you as you're trying to build influence. Specifically thinking about your purpose and your goals. So whether those are people you're managing, more senior people in your organization, or cross-functional leaders, or clients, or other people in your network, it should be kind of a diverse group of stakeholders. And you're rating each of them. You can do it on a scale of 1 to 10 if that helps you, on the influence that they have, their power, and then also on the interests they would have in your career, or the concern for you in your career that they would each have. And you would plot them on this matrix here, and you can start seeing how in different quadrants you would probably be approaching them a bit differently, thinking about them differently when you're working on building your visibility and your influence. So the ones with a lot of influence and also interest in your career, those are the people you'll be managing most closely. And it's helpful to be putting effort in that direction, perhaps a little bit less so than the ones who have lower concern for your career. And I do want to point out the third quadrant, the bottom right here, where it says keep informed. Those individuals that you have there might not have that much power themselves, but they might be very useful to lean on for support and go to with questions and things like that. So you're not eliminating them off of your matrix. You're just thinking about them in a different way. And then probably the other ones that end up in quadrant 4 would be deprioritized and probably not worth spending that much energy on. And keeping this updated, like everything we're talking about here, keeping an eye on the power dynamics and how they shift around you in an organization and changes that are going on with these stakeholders along with your goals, to keep this updated and keep thinking about who is important when you're thinking about your influence and visibility in the workplace. So the internal audit, switching gears here, I'm using French and Raven's bases of power. These are different types of power that can help you understand your source of influence. So the internal audit and thinking about where your power stems from. You start with rating yourself on each of these dimensions, and you can look into this more yourself, but essentially legitimate power is it's your authority from your role or your position, your job title. Reward is the ability to provide benefits or opportunities. Referent is influence earned through trust and respect. Informational, and this is the last one they added to this model, so sometimes it's not included. Informational is influence through access to information, and that is the easiest to acquire. Coercive is the ability to apply consequences or withhold support. And expert power is influence based on knowledge or skill. So I would point out that legitimate, reward, and coercive tend to require a job title or some sort of external factors, but referent, informational, and expert are ones that you can be building from today. They don't need anything else, and they are easier to acquire. They are also more motivating for your employees. People tend to feel more inspired and motivated when their leaders are using these types of power rather than, you can probably see that, rather than, wielding your authority from your job title or other types of power that you have that can be seen as a little harder. So you're rating yourself on each of these, and then you're adding a second rating, which is based on your goals and based on the environment, which types of power would be most effective, because it differs based on the team and the wider environment that you're in. Which types of power get heard the most? What has the most impact in your particular environment? So you don't want to waste time on things that maybe aren't that helpful for what you're trying to achieve. And you're doing this to achieve, to figure out both the strengths. So see where you already have power and make sure you are using that, or think about any other ways you can be leveraging that better. And then identifying those gaps. Where would it be worth it for you to try to be building your power to have the influence that you want to have? Something else here that's a little bit unexpected, people tend to make assumptions about how senior leaders are using power, and it's actually that your most senior, your top executives tend to use more informational power than any other types, and they do so more than mid-level management and, you know, as you move down all the way to frontline employees. So informational power, do not underestimate that. Okay, so now if you've gone through the external kind of thinking about the setting that we're in and what's around us and thinking about how we're showing up within it, now it's time to talk about how exactly you can put this into practice. So there's a lot of different advice out there and techniques and tactics for persuading people and influencing in certain situations. So that would be too much, you know, too much detail for me to go into in this talk. But I tried to pick the top 4 most impactful actions for building influence. Validation, and this is validation from Carolyn Fleck's model of validation. She has a book called Validation, The New Psychology of Influence. This is the most effective way I have come across for influence in an interpersonal interaction. So if you're trying to manage up, or you're trying to manage somebody who's more senior, or you're just trying to get your point across when you're interacting with other people, this model is so powerful. You're basically showing up in an interaction and you're saying, I hear you, I see you, I get you. It builds trust with people. And if you remember, trust leads to referent power. So this is incredible for that relationship, but also the influence you want to be building, because people are much more likely to listen to you and to trust you. So you're showing up mindfully in an interaction. You're showing that you understand where they're coming from, and you're demonstrating empathy. The next one is leveraging expectations. You've just done all this work understanding your environment and how people expect you to show up. Use that to your advantage. So an example of this is how women are often expected to be focused on others, to put others first. So in negotiations, women tend to be more successful with their outcomes if they frame that negotiation, if they frame the ask in terms of how it benefits other people. So don't get too, you know, this is where we get creative with solutions and we adopt the paradox mindset and thinking about how we can use this to our advantage. The next point here is ensuring credibility. It takes a lot to be aware of how we're showing up in interactions with people, in written communication and spoken communication. So it's basically just checking that you're not undermining yourself. You're speaking confidently. You're not using the minimizers and hedging and qualifying your statements, and that you know, your body language and your pace, your tone of voice, all of these things are lending themselves to the credibility, the reputation you want to have in your influence. The last one here is basically putting the paradox mindset into practice. And that is, it's pairing the warmth and strength, pairing these things together so that you can navigate backlash you might face if you feel that's relevant for your workplace and how you need to show up. An example of this is if you're in a meeting and you're struggling to get your point across, and your typical approach to communication might not be that assertive. If you preface something that you're going to say in a stronger, more assertive way with something like, Now, I'm going to put this bluntly. It brings something that tends to be unconscious into conscious awareness, and then it minimizes that negative impact you might otherwise see. So I've got these in that toolkit that I mentioned earlier, and I also include more detail for each of them in terms of how to put this into practice. So please do check that out. I also have this model in the toolkit, and this is just more detail on validation, how it works in practice, and the skills required there. So please do check out that toolkit. I'm aware we want to leave enough time for questions, so I'm going to be moving through the last couple of slides a little bit more quickly. I have some suggested actions here for building visibility specifically, and thinking about those stakeholders. If you went through that exercise earlier, think about who needs to know about your work and what you want to be known for. And from there, think about, how are you spending your time? So the first one is a time audit, which is a great practice. A lot of your tasks are maybe outside of your control. They have to be done. But if you're aware of exactly how much time you're spending on each group of tasks, you can prioritize the higher visibility things and challenge yourself to see if anything else can be shifted. Think about credit. Are you passing credit on to your team or other people, while at the same time readily accepting blame for stuff that wasn't entirely your responsibility? Think about that language and make sure that it's not hurting your visibility. Building allies at work. So these are people, and this is a mutual relationship where you do this for one another. They don't have to be your best friend. It's just somebody who understands what you want to be known for, and putting your name forward, talking about you when you're not in the room. So think about these allies, these relationships that you can have. Asking more strategic questions that show you're thinking about these higher priorities and that next level. And then you kind of have to repeat yourself more than you think you need to, or state things more than you think you need to, in order to really get that visibility locked in. So updating stakeholders with relevant changes, being aware of their priorities, and just sending them notes or mentioning things that you've done or that you're aware of. These habits all feed into your visibility. These are just bonus tips anyways. These are all in the toolkit. Basically, it's putting it into practice. People underestimate the likelihood that others will comply to a request by about 48%, because we have that fear of rejection. So I can't emphasize enough the importance of just making the ask, of trying, of wherever the edge of your comfort zone is, with practicing influencing and using power in interactions or in any situation is really helpful for, building that comfort and pushing yourself in this area, and whatever that might be. So asking for substitutions in a meal at a restaurant, or bartering in a market, use whatever feels like just a little bit uncomfortable for you, and just keep practicing that. Okay, coming up towards the end of time here. So key takeaways for all of this, I would say influence is not just based on your performance, it's about the perception of your performance. And being strategic about this, strategic navigation requires being aware of power dynamics around you and the key players on your journey to being more influential. We're also building and delivering influence in context, not in a vacuum. So keeping that awareness and understanding how that impacts how you're showing up and what you're trying to achieve. And then doing so with purpose, credibility, and authentic presence to really drive that impact. The last note here, what I want to leave you with, is doing all of this with agency. It's taking ownership of it. So trusting yourself and your instincts, continuously checking alignment with your purpose and values to see what's realistic and what feels right for you. The growth here, it does require getting out of your comfort zone, making mistakes, experimenting with things, getting feedback, and reflecting, adjusting from there. So it requires challenging yourself and pushing yourself, but always balance that with equal self-compassion and support, because this needs to be sustainable growth. It's a long game we're playing here. So make sure you aren't challenging yourself too much and not coming in with the compassion to support it. Okay. So that is everything that I have. I would encourage you to try to pick something out of this, an exercise or an action that feels realistic and aligned for you that you can experiment with and get started. You'll get I think it's next week, you might get an email with the toolkit in it, and that includes all the exercises and actions and also recommended resources for building influence. So check that out. It really builds on what I've shared today. So you'll get that next week, along with a code to access the LeadHerself app. We are doing a free journey in the app. There is one on building influence, actually, that pairs really well with this material. So the LeadHerself app is available for iPhone and Android, so you can go ahead and download it. There is a 2-week free trial. But then after that, you can use the code that you'll get in the email from SGI, and then you have lifetime access to any of the journeys that you want. And you can keep building your influence from there or other skills. So keep an eye out for the emails from SGI, and check out LeadHerself, the website or Instagram or anything like that, and feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn as well. Okay. I know I did go over, but I'm going to hand it back to Louis now to lead the Q&A.
No, that was absolutely amazing. Thank you so much. And we had huge amounts of engagement on that as well. So I'm going to fly through some of these questions, Julianna, and please let me know if you need some clarification. But the first one, it says, when you realize you're being judged for being too strong or not warm enough, what's something simple you can say or do in the moment to reset the tone without softening your point?
Oh, that's a really good question and a big one. Part of me wants to say it depends a little bit on the history of how you're showing up. And if there were not so much a hack, but a go-to move, I might address it if it feels authentic to you, calling out if there is some sort of mismatch and you're not being heard. Kind of depends on the situation and the relationship with the other person or the other people. But I think, if you feel that judgment between strength and softness, I would probably call it out, bring it into conscious awareness for everybody that's involved, because it tends to be something that happens under the surface, and that's where we have the negative reactions, and people don't really mean to be thinking that way. So I'd shed light on it and use one of those statements like, now I do have to put this bluntly, or, if it's something about how you're normally showing up and saying, this isn't usual for me, but I need to assert myself a little bit more here. That would be my best advice, not knowing situation or self in that context. But yeah, thank you for the question. That's a really good one.
Yeah, sorry, I started off hard there. The next one here says, what are your favorite low effort ways to stay visible at work, especially for people who aren't naturally loud or front facing?
Low effort. I like that. We're using energy wisely. I would probably say the 2 habits that I think are easiest, they don't require a massive change in who you are or what you're doing, but these little habits that you can get in. One, I mentioned, and this was quite brief, but I mentioned updating stakeholders with relevant changes. It can feel uncomfortable and unnecessary at first. We kind of assume people should know what we're up to, but everybody's busy, especially as you keep moving up in management. They've got their own stuff going on and they don't really know the details of what you've been doing. So we kind of have to say it. some tactics I've heard for this are like getting in the habit of emailing your manager or whoever those key stakeholders are that you want to keep in the loop, thinking about their priorities and just basically dropping updates of things that you know about, that you're aware of, or where it's relevant, something that you might have done, a task you completed, or something you've accomplished that's relevant for them. And it's just keeping people up to date, and it's fostering those connections with important stakeholders and repeating yourself a little bit, stating what you've done. So I think updating stakeholders, and then the other one that's quite, I think it's low effort, would be thinking about questions you could ask in meetings, or even if it's just one-on-one, that reflect an understanding of higher priorities and an interest in it and thinking about the bigger picture. So it's questions that would force deeper reflection from people. So it's demonstrating your thinking and your knowledge or skills through questioning, can help build that visibility as well. So thinking about questions and updates, I would say, are the low effort ones.
Amazing. Amazing. Some great tips and advice there as well. And then I think we've got one, two, there's 4 more questions here. There's definitely one that I want to ask at the end. But what's your go-to way to build allies in a workplace that still feels quite male dominated?
My go-to, well, okay, I think, yeah, that's a really good question. There are a lot of allies out there. We tend to not really know who they are or how they'd be willing to help us. Sometimes you can see, and if it's, if it's, we're thinking about quite a male-dominated environment, and there's anything in the organization that they're doing around initiatives that are supporting women, or you can think about stuff that's going on in the organization that might draw interest from people who would have similar values to you. That could be projects, it could look like a lot of different things. Again, these people don't have to be your best friend. You're not going to be hanging out with them. It's a mutual relationship. So maybe if it feels more comfortable, think about who you could help, who you're in a position to put forward for stuff, or just kind of recommend and compliment and have their back in a visible setting. And then see if there is somebody who is in a mutual position there to be helping you. And it's these little alliances. So it's look for similar values. Don't look for people that you need to befriend. So think about the values and what that might draw them to, if there are employee resource groups or things like that in an organization that you might have mutual interests or values in. That's not necessarily just a gender divide. It could be something else as well. No, that wasn't the most concise answer, but I hope that helps.
No, I think that's a great answer, actually. I think it is so key to just have people that you can associate with as well, from that perspective, especially from a values perspective. I think this one is a great question, and I think, despite this person asking it, I'm sure it will be a lot of people sort of feel this. So if you try something new, like being more assertive, and it doesn't land well, what's the best way to recover and keep experimenting without losing your confidence?
I love that question. Yeah, that's really good. And this is inevitable, because if you aren't getting it wrong, you're probably not experimenting enough and taking those risks that we do need to take. And it is very vulnerable. It does require courage most of the time. I've gotten it wrong. This has been a learning process for me. I've tried different stuff, and you have to find out what doesn't work in order to find out what does some of the time. But that doesn't belittle the fact that it can shake confidence, and can make you doubt yourself.
Yeah, definitely.
Personally, yeah, sorry, I want to add a little bit more
Yeah.
on that. I feel like we get this signal that we can be not enough or too much, and we get when it doesn't quite work out, and we then need to kind of pick ourselves up and figure out how to take that next step. I think a larger mindset of trying to take your work seriously and your goals seriously, but not yourself. So you can take the ego out of it a little bit, because this isn't about you, and blaming yourself and starting to think, starting to think it might be an issue with you, and then letting it shake your confidence is going to be kind of the breaks my heart a little bit. Coming at it with curiosity and compassion instead, because it's a tough thing, but you are not alone in these issues, and it's not about you. It's a reflection of the people around you and your environment. Yeah, I hope there's something in there that resonates with you.
Amazing. Okay, perfect. And I think we've got three more, I think, if that's okay. Um, how do you stay true to yourself while still being how do you stay true to yourself while still being strategic about how you show up at work? Have you ever caught yourself over strategizing?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because things like influence can feel a little bit manipulative, or it can feel selfish if this is out of your comfort zone, and you want to be true to yourself. You want to be authentic, but at the same time, you do probably have goals. Otherwise, you wouldn't be in this webinar today. So this is that exercise of thinking about boundaries that you want to have on your authenticity to make sure that you are still serving where you want to get. So this is thinking, there's 60% probably, if I were to put a number on it, of who you are, your real traits and qualities and behaviors and how you show up, and your entire identity is probably appropriate for the workplace and effective for it. But that other 40%, we often have to stretch. And I would never say fake it till you make it. I don't like that advice, because I think there's within us a piece of whatever quality that we need to, whether it's be stronger, be more assertive, that probably sits within your authentic personality. It's just perhaps not, maybe in a different situation you feel more comfortable expressing that, or if it's doubt that's keeping it under wraps. I would never say, it's not a part of your identity at all. So it's more thinking about which of your real tendencies and traits you want to take a back seat in some situations, and what you want to then lean into and grow to be intentional and get where you want to get. I'm not sure I've ever found myself feeling like I was over strategizing in a situation or being disingenuine. But I've gotten quite good at practicing grounding myself in my why and my purpose and my values that guide how I show up in interactions. So that can keep you in a place that feels aligned and doesn't feel fake or like you're overdoing it, or you're just being, performative about your influence and how you want to show up at work. So ground yourself in that clear purpose and authenticity with boundaries that keep you protected and effective, but are still true to who you are. To balance.
Amazing. I think we have time for one more question, and I'll end it on this one. So it says, I have 15 years of experience in software engineering, and I'm currently re-entering the job market after a career break. How can I intentionally build my visibility and influence during this transition? And what should I focus on in the first 90 days of a new job to set myself up for credibility, confidence, and impact in a male-dominated space?
Okay, I'm just taking a second with this because there's a lot there. It is a big transition points often trigger a lot of vulnerability as we're trying to grow into something new, regardless of the experience that we have. But, changing jobs or coming back after a career break or moving into a new position, that change is always, it challenges your identity, it challenges your skills and what you feel you're capable of doing. So I think in terms of visibility, moving into a new role like this and making that change, thinking about those stakeholders, trying to, get a feel for who is important, who are the key stakeholders for your influence during that transition, who are the people that you want to be, having the impact you want to have on, and thinking about making those connections, but also be observing power dynamics around the team and the organization as well. So you see how the unwritten rules of the organization, how things work like that, who gets listened to. So it's thinking about those power dynamics and who those key players are for you. And that when you have that authentic, when you define that authentic leadership for yourself and make sure it's something that feels aligned and realistic for you, it's easier to show up every day consistently like that and make the impression you want to make and build that reputation you want to have from, day one and into those first couple of months. I think there's probably a lot I could say here, but I know we're about to end the session. So it's the little interactions, it's thinking about the people, it's thinking about the power dynamics. And you don't have to be perfect. Just be authentic about it, but be intentional about it as well. So working on this visibility in a way that manages your energy at the same time. So when you're strategic, thinking about the people and the types of power that seem important and in that environment and authentic to you. Yeah.
Amazing. And one thing that I will say, if the person that asked that question is still on this call, as part of our sort of super women in tech community, if you want to put it that way, we are massive advocates of people that are re-entering the job market. So please reach out to me directly on LinkedIn, and I'll set you up in a conversation either with myself or someone within the team that will be able to provide some advice, some guidance, or whatever might be useful. Please feel free to reach out to me directly. Julianna, I will use the last 2 minutes of this by saying thank you. I think it's that the engagement's been great. Right? There's definitely more questions than what we have time for. Julianna is on LinkedIn as well, and I'm sure if you do have any questions, I'm sure she'll be open, and obviously the app as well from that perspective. But I will end this by saying thank you very much. It's been a great session.
This has been amazing. Thank you for having me. Really appreciate it.
Great stuff. Thank you all. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.